When he talks about dignity on page 34, he goes, this is like he says at the top of it, I would like, if I may, to try and say here what I think that this dignity to be. And then we have literally pages of him trying to explain this. But the part that I highlighted, probably third paragraph on that page 34, second sentence in, where he says, but those same absent attributes, I would argue, are every time those of a superficial and decorative order, attributes that are attractive, no doubt, as icing on the cake, but are not pertaining to what is really essential. I refer to things such as good accent and command of language, general knowledge of wide ranging topics such as falconing or newt mating, attributes none of which my father could have boasted. Now we get to the father comparison, the tragic, the classic, I guess,
Yeah.
archetype at this point.
No, it must be remembered that my father was a butler of an earlier generation. Yeah, I mean, this is like an important conversation that keeps coming up um, throughout the book. This idea of greatness and professionalism and dignity as being a really important component of what he understands greatness to be, and ultimately, like, how he understands his father or what he saw as greatness in his father. So his father ends up coming up a lot as an example.
Well, that's the thing, yeah, because it was a class thing, particularly in his father's generation, because of this feudal like system that was being run over there.
Well, yeah, and they were, butlers at the same house.
Yeah. And it was like, it was this generational thing, too. Like, that wasn't like unusual. It was like if you were born into this aristocracy, if you were the butler, you were still, more higher up in the status hierarchy, than somebody who was just whatever, farming or whatever.
Yeah.
So it
Well,
was something you could like, you would want your children to like, whatever.
yeah, and he tells a story that his father tells him. I'm on page 36. He says, I believe the telling and retelling of this story was as close as my father ever came to reflecting critically on the profession he practiced. As such, it gives a vital clue to his thinking. And so he tells a story about, okay, the story was apparently an apparently true one concerning a certain butler who had traveled with his employer to India and served there for many years, maintaining amongst the native staff the same high standards that he had commanded in England. One afternoon, evidently, this butler had entered the dining room to make sure all was well for dinner when he noticed a tiger languishing beneath the dining table. The butler had left the dining room quietly, taking care to close the doors behind him, and proceeded calmly to the drawing room where his employer was taking tea with a number of visitors. There he attracted his employer's attention with a polite cough, then whispered in the latter's ear, I'm very sorry, sir, but there appears to be a tiger in the dining room. Perhaps you will permit the 12 boars to be used. And according to legend, a few minutes later, the employer and his guests heard 3 gunshots. Um, and the last phrase, no discernible traces left of the recent occurrence by that time, my father would repeat with a laugh and shake his head admiringly.
And he I guess he reflects on this more as you get further into the book. It's not even that long of a book. I mean, it's like 200 pages in this edition. Like, uh, I read it in a couple days, even though I was a little, kind of a slog for me. But so it's a pretty readable book. He's got a very readable style. Like his writing style is very, you move through it very seamlessly. It's like you just ride the wave. But when he talks about like, or Stevens rather, the character, like when he goes into those peasants or like those farmers in the country, he considers himself superior to them.
Oh, yeah.
But then, like when we
Well,
meet him, we're seeing like he heck, it's because he hangs around with all these other people. that are
But he even considers himself superior to the people that he works with for the most part,
right. Well, and because
including the
that
woman that
position,
he kind of
yeah.
loves. Like,
Oh, yeah. I think they make that very clear as the character can with everything else. Since the character, like you said, Stevens himself does seem very cold and is
yeah,
usually dishonest about.
well, and I think that's sort of presented as like the ultimate dignity almost, or he mistakes it for what dignity is that like, this quiet butler who like calmly goes and taps, his employer on the shoulder while he's with company and says, like, "Excuse me, sir, there's a tiger underneath the table in the dining room. Like, would you please permit me to handle it?" Instead of like running and being like, "Holy shit, dude, there's like a tiger in the house. What the fuck is going on?"
Yeah, and there was this constant theme in the book about this like sacrifice, this and not like a pleasant like the suffering of sacrifice was a
Well, and
huge.
restraint.
Well, yeah,
I was like, he's always saying like, "I was obliged and I hope you will excuse my whatever." You know, there's a lot of restraint and even almost like a resentment um, toward the end to that restraint.
yeah. He just and he talks about that as
The remains of the day.
well, more about like that dignity as he lays out those examples where like this idea of sacrifice for the dignity of it, and